Hey everybody, I'm going to kind of go through just a quick little tutorial on how to put down your drawing and how to work the watercolors for your in-class or your online art project. And so what I've done in the module, or the assignment rather, I have given you three watercolor examples. These are the first two, and then this is the third one. And I would like for you to attempt one. If you would like to do two, that would be great as well. And so I'm going to show you sort of how to transfer this down onto the paper so you get a nice drawing. And then I'm going to kind of go over the watercolor technique that I use in order to make it a successful painting with just a real limited palette. So let's take this one for example here, this first one. So what I will do is, if you can print out the three examples, print them out. I don't know if you can size them. These are about 4x6, 5x7, somewhere in that range, maybe a little bit smaller for some of them. You don't have to do a very big painting. I don't want anything any bigger than like maybe 5x7 inches. So don't go do a huge 8x10, it's not necessary. So what you do is you take your picture after you've printed it out, and you'll take a pencil and you will go over the back of the printout just like this, making sure you have darkened it. You don't have to get it super dark, but you want just enough lead on it to where it's kind of dark. Alright, and once you've darkened it, you're going to place it on your watercolor paper, like so. And you're going to take your pencil and you're just going to trace over the photograph of the painting or the printout that you did. And I'm doing this real rough. You may want to use like a mechanical pencil or not such a wide lead pencil. But trace over every aspect of it, all the shapes, the shadows. You don't have to worry about the little small rocks, I don't think. I would just focus on the big rock. Finish it out, make sure all your lines are right. You can lift it up and check on it if you want. Just make sure you hold it down in place because you don't want to lose your place. And then after you have gone over the whole printout with your pencil and just sort of an outline, you'll come up with something it looks kind of like this. It may be a little bit more detailed. It probably should be, depending on, maybe spend a little bit more time on it. But that's how you transfer the printout copy to the watercolor paper and get a nice little sketch that doesn't look like it's, all over the place. You can do this with each one of these if you want. It takes, that took me all of about 2 minutes to do. So once you have put it down on the surface of the watercolor paper, then you can start working on your painting. Now I started this one earlier just to see if I was going to need a hair dryer in terms of dry time, and it turns out that I'm going to, because you see these run marks here. This is when the paper is not fully dry, and I took another tone of watercolor and put it on top of the previous level of watercolor, and now I've got run marks. So if you have a hair dryer, you don't, anything. If you don't want to use a hair dryer, you're going to have to let it sit up and maybe dry for about 5 minutes in between layers so it doesn't run on you. But if you do have a hair dryer, make sure you hold it back away from the painting about 12 inches and just go back and forth with your hair dryer like this. And don't hold it real close because it'll blow your watercolor like that off the paper. So once you get it on the paper and you get it sketched out, then I'm going to kind of show you sort of some color mixing techniques here. I think we can kind of see pretty much everything. So the only three colors you're going to be using are the primaries, which are the red, the yellow, and the blue for your for all three of these actually. You don't need to use any other colors but the red, the yellow, and the blue. So I've already put down an initial layer of sort of like it was a red type of a yellow with a little blue in it. It's kind of a light brown tan type color. Looks kind of like this color. And of course the first layer went down, and What you have to remember about watercolor is the more water you put into it, that's what lightens it up. So you see that mark right there on the paper? If I put one little mark down and wet my brush and then dab it on a paper towel, then I can take that one little dab and just kind of spread it out and put it down sort of softly onto the paper, like so. So you don't want to, you want to put water, and you see how I'm sort of working this out and working the painting. The reason it's working is I'm not putting the paint on too dry, if you put the paint on too dry, you're going to get marks on the paper that look like opaque paint. And watercolor is not an opaque medium. It is a watercolor medium to be used with water. So let's take a little bit of blue and put it in this brown mixture, maybe just a spot of red. And remember, your mixture of your paint, of your watercolor, how you mix the paint depends on the amount you put into the mixture. So if you put 2 or 3 parts blue and 1 part red, you're going to get something that's almost like a black. If you put a lot of red, you don't put much blue or yellow, then you can get something that looks really red, and the same goes forth with the yellow. So I'm going to start with this, and I'm just going to go right along this edge here, and I'm not fussing with it, meaning I'm not raking the brush back and forth. I'm just putting the watercolor down, and I'm going back to get more. And you see how there's just not a whole lot of water in here, but there's just enough where it spreads like it's supposed to. Just a nice, gentle spread of the paint. It doesn't need to be opaque, and it doesn't need to be so wet that, you know, it just floods the paper and all the color and the pigment wash out. So just like that, and then once I finish that one little area, I'm just going to move over here to another area and kind of block in her hair. Just like that. And then she has a little bit of a shadow on her neck. And she has some tones in her face, which are sort of a reddish yellow, kind of some dark shadows in some areas around her cheekbone. And I'm just going to kind of drop that in. And I'm constantly kind of dabbing that brush on a paper towel and putting water in and working it. But I'm not overworking it. I'm not sort of fussing with it. And she has this shadow that's created right here on her arm. It comes down her arm, but what separates the arm from the background is it's not as dark as the background. It's just a little bit lighter. So you don't want her arm, even though it's got a strong shadow on it, you don't want it to run into the background. And then up here, put a little bit, and then she's got some shadows right here on her legs, and I'll just sort of spread those out a little bit. Moving that color. I got a little bit out of the lines, that's okay. If you get out of the lines, you just put a little water on that brush and just pull up the pigment on the surface. Do this leg, and I just have to make sure that one is a little bit lighter than the other. I think the inside leg I'm going to make a little bit darker, and that'll give contrast between the two. Going down. And now while I let that dry, I'm going to come over here and sort of shadow this rock. Put this little drop shadow down. Sort of work around it and start to form it out a little bit. Same thing with these little spots right here that hit. Let's make this shadow a little darker. The shadow kind of gets really dark up here next to her legs, which is the reason is because it is closest to her body. And then as it moves out away from her, it really kind of lightens up just a bit. That's a little too much red. I'll pull some of that, spread it out a little bit like that. That's a little better. And it just lightens up as it moves away from her. Now, there's not a whole lot, because of the jumper she's wearing, or the shorts and the shirt, there's not a whole lot of paint action going on in her clothing. So you don't have to get real just overly complicated with that. You want to come back in and maybe put some little hits of some detail when it starts to dry, like right underneath the short leg and where the shorts meet the leg, and create that little bit of a drop shadow. And this is just like the first layer. I can come back in and I can continue to make this hillside even darker and darker as I move along. So the reason you start off light is because once you put down dark watercolor paint, you cannot pull it back up again. It melds with the paper and stains the paper. So it's best to work light to dark, and then just continue to darken it up as you move along. And you can work it as much as you want. I see some areas here, you know, kind of like a yellow ochre that runs kind of up in this area with a little bit darker shadow in it up in here. Like that. And so that's just, you know, that's about 15 minutes worth of work. And you can just kind of let it set up and let it dry. And then you can go back in. Like I said, you can continue to darken areas. You can continue to drop in color. But that's just sort of how you go about approaching this first painting. And then I'll do, I'm going to load up a couple more for the next two.